Welcome to FreightWaves today. It is Friday. It is 1 week before the Labor Day holiday. We're going to get into that. That has a big impact on the freight markets. And really, I think as we think about peak season, right after Labor Day is when it all sort of starts. It's that early fall. It's a time of year when we start to see a lot of product move the supply chain, first off the coast, into the Inland Empire, and then into the center of the country. It's my favorite time of year. Fall football also coming up. We have college football starting, which is also great. High school football is underway. Julie, what are the plans for the weekend?
Soccer, kids soccer.
No football.
Just lots. I mean, I'm sure we'll watch football at home, but we'll be living on the soccer fields all day tomorrow for sure. And then, we'll be watching some football as it gets started and kicks off. Certainly, my kid's been watching the pro preseason games.
Okay. My 7-year-old is doing football.
Flag.
Sort of practice, I would almost call it. Like they do games, but it's like I don't know, like.
Is it flag football or is it like?
No, it's like real football. They're like.
He has pads and stuff?
Yeah, he's got a helmet.
It's
really cute. It's adorable. But I don't know that they're tackling. They only went out. My wife took them out one day. I think it's mostly practice. It's not real football. It's not hard hitting.
Well, hopefully not. Yeah, you don't want.
No, I don't want brain injuries for my poor 7-year-old.
I just read like 1 in 4. They think that 1 in 4 professional football players end up having some sort of trauma, like head trauma or brain trauma. I don't know if that's true or not, but I just read an article on it.
It has been a big topic. There was a great movie about that a couple of years ago. NFL didn't particularly appreciate that. It is, it's obviously, as brain research continues to pile up, hopefully they'll, do we see a world where there isn't tackle football? I can't imagine. There's too much money. I always say follow the money.
It's so fun to watch.
I know, it is fun to watch. I mean, these people are sort of think about it, throughout the history of civilization, we've always had some kind of violent. I think we'd rather have football games and athletics versus war, because I think
absolutely, yes,
that's sort of built into humanity that we have to have competition. Physical competition used to be out there fighting each other for resources, and now they're fighting each other for glory. Even more fun.
Good way to put it.
So let's get into the Morning Minute.
Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern are aggressively defending their proposed mega merger against mounting opposition. In a response filing released Thursday, the Class 1 railroads told the Surface Transportation Board that their application contains extensive evidence developed over months of work and more than clears the threshold to move regulatory review forward. Union Pacific CEO Jim Vena characterized the filing as an unprecedented volume of evidence demonstrating benefits for employees, customers, and the broader U.S. economy. The combined company promises new, faster, single-line service across more than 88,000 county-to-county lanes, supply chain reductions of 24 to 48 hours on affected movements, and the diversion of 2.1 million truckloads from highway to rail. The STB's procedural schedule now governs the next stages of review, with a final decision expected in late 2027. Meanwhile, a brutal wave of bankruptcies is sweeping through the freight and logistics sector. At least 21 transportation and logistics-related companies filed for Chapter 7 liquidation or Chapter 11 protection between late July and August 25th, hitting trucking companies, freight forwarders, distributors, warehouses, and other supply chain businesses across the U.S. The filings range from single truck carriers to national distributors, with hundreds of millions of dollars in assets and liabilities. Among the largest was BFG Supply Company, an Indianapolis-based horticultural and agricultural supply distributor that filed for Chapter 11 protection on August 18th, with both assets and liabilities estimated between $100 million and $500 million and more than 100,000 creditors. The filings underscore how financial hardship remains uneven across the freight economy, with small trucking companies struggling alongside larger logistics and distribution businesses confronting debt loads, thin asset bases, and restructuring challenges. Finally, federal regulators are moving ahead with pilot programs that could fundamentally reshape how truck drivers manage their workdays. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration announced Thursday that it has completed pre-tests for its flexible sleeper berth and split duty period pilot programs and is reviewing results ahead of a planned full launch in 2027. The split duty period pilot would allow participating drivers to pause the critical 14-hour driving window for up to 3 hours per day while in qualifying non-driving status, effectively giving drivers more ability to wait out heavy traffic or severe weather and account for detention time at customer facilities. Each pilot is expected to enroll 256 drivers for a total of 512 participants who will participate for 4 months and can receive up to $1,600 for completing all study requirements. However, highway safety advocates have pushed back hard, arguing the split duty concept could effectively stretch a driver's workday from 14 hours to as long as 17 hours.
So, Julie, I do think the hours of service are due for an overhaul. They've always been a problem. Ultimately, you're taking the autonomy of the driver to determine, because of this regimented set of rules, determine whether they feel up to driving. And I think getting some flexibility, looking at this in a controlled pilot, I applaud the FMCSA for doing things that make the lives easier for drivers, because it's really, these rules have just created their own set of problems.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, listen, a 17-hour workday, they're concerned about that. But the reality is what it's doing is it's allowing them to break when they need to break, right? So if they're sitting, waiting to be unloaded and they're collecting detention, they shouldn't be on the clock. They're not working at that point. They are resting. And I think the point that if it allows them, if there's weather that's passing through, to be able to stop that 14 hours and wait it out those 3 days, or start rolling and then wait out a heavy traffic period, and then start rolling again, those should be calls that professional trained drivers should be able to make.
I agree.
So I think this all leads to the issue is, if we have safer drivers who are properly vetted, who have been through the proper training, who have legitimate CDLs on safer roads, because we have made regulation around who drives, then they should have more autonomy to decide when they want to break and for how long, and extend those hours if they need to. I would be really interested to also see the data on the pilot and what it does to utilization, how much it impacts and improves utilization.
So here's the downside of improved utilization. Obviously fleets benefit from that, but you are opening up some capacity. So the more flexible that you get, if you actually enforce the rules, which has always been sort of the rub for, ever since we had ELD devices, is this idea that some carriers are not compliant. And so you have these restrictions in terms of hours. Not everyone's playing by the same set of rules, but what happens is you make it more flexible. You make it so you increase utilization, but you end up creating more available hours in total for the market and available capacity that creates a drag on the market.
More loads per week for existing driver. Yeah.
I want to talk about another story that's popped up. It's I wouldn't say it's divided social media, but there are different perspectives. It's a Highway versus Motive, two very large companies. In full disclosure, I've been involved in both in very early stages of these companies. Highway, obviously, this very large load, this identity verification, fraud management company that is really ubiquitous across brokers. Motive, a very large ELD provider, mostly, or at least predominantly in the SMB trucking market. They've gone at war. So Motive wants to charge Highway for access to data feeds. And what they've done, since Highway has refused to pay, is they've started to throttle the data feed into Highway's network. Highway is not paying. They believe that this is a change in their agreement, that they've had access to Motive's ELD location information for at least since Highway started, 2022. Highway contends that is their data, or the fleet's data, that essentially it's the fleet's data that's on Motive's network, and therefore Highway does not believe that they should be charged. Your thoughts on this?
Okay, I should also disclose that I have vested interest in the success of Highway, particularly in their SVP of product and strategic partnerships. He's a pretty great guy.
He's your husband,
correct?
To be clear, your husband works at Highway.
But even that aside, yes, I think it is the carrier's data, and ultimately, what I think this hurts Motive more than it hurts Highway for two reasons.
I agree with that.
Like it or not, Highway has really very quickly become and continuing to become the standard for brokers. And if this means that the carriers who have Motive's ELD no longer get access to certain freight from specific brokers because they require load lock or because they require access to that ELD data, then that is absolutely a switching reason, right? And I think there are more ELD options on the market than there are really good fraud and freight prevention market.
Well, look, I think the
and
number...
I also think that what's to say then that the carriers can't start, now these SMB carriers don't have the IT infrastructure that others do, sharing it on their own, right? This was just a way to make it easier for these carriers, for Motive's customers. It's almost a value add for Motive's customers that it is automatically shared with Highway and they don't have to do that anymore.
That's my contention.
So
I agree. So I'll look at it from, let's put the arguments aside on whether this is the right or wrong thing to do. Because you could make arguments on both sides of the equation.
I understand where both sides are coming from, right?
100%. I mean, Motive wants to monetize more
Their
parts
data.
of their business. They filed an S1 to go public. Again, I own pre-IPO shares, so I would love for Motive to have a fantastic outcome. But let me tell you why I think that Motive loses here. And it comes back to just follow the money. Is ultimately Highway is much closer to how carriers get paid. The reason being that the carriers that make up Motive's network, a large portion of the freight that those carriers are hauling happens to be through freight brokers. Like it or not, freight brokers control so much of the freight for these carriers and control who gets freight allocated.
Exactly right.
Now, Highway, as the primary technology platform for verification, and in recent years, this has become far more important. We've had the security crisis of a couple of years ago, combined with the safety issues in a post-Montgomery lupus period. This means that brokers are cracking down on whom they're doing business with. The verification is becoming far more important. This lawsuit that we've covered, 2 of them in double brokering, makes it even more fundamental. You need the ELD data. And here's the issue, is that Highway, because brokers are making the decision on whom to use, and brokers are paying Highway to do that, that brokers, if they're not selecting capacity because this carrier is invisible to them or the ELD location is invisible to the broker, they're not going to get those loads. And so if you're a Motive customer, if you're a Motive fleet, you are going to look and say, hey, I'm not getting the same opportunities that I used to get because I don't have Highway. Therefore, I'm going to switch.
And that's where this confuses me. Like, I understand trying to monetize the data. They say it's their data. I would argue it's the carrier's data. I understand that side of the argument. But ultimately, what I think this does is it hurts their customers. So, like, that's what I feel bad for. I feel bad for these carriers who have Motive ELDs.
Well, they're in the middle of
who
this.
are now getting likely less opportunity at freight that they were.
They're in the middle of this. And so regardless of who is in the right or wrong, I think the viewer can decide if they're on Team Highway.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's who I feel bad for. It's this
But it's the carriers. And it reminds me of, every year or so, we see these big cable networks sort of get into the arguments. You see the ESPN. The worst thing as a college football fan is when ESPN
and YouTube
gets
TV
into some
can't get
argument with some cable network, whether it's Comcast or YouTube or whatever, because the network wants to raise their fee, or the cable network is wanting to reduce the fee, whatever the argument is. And you're like, hey, come on, guys. I want to see my games. I
work
don't
your
want to
crap
be
out. I don't care what you guys think. Give me what I want.
My problem. We saw it also with the insurance companies here locally. Is there was a hospital network that got into an argument with the insurance company, and then all of a sudden you lose coverage. And guess what happens? You end up one or two things happen. You change insurance providers, which certainly has happened, and we did the same because it was we lost access to one of our major hospital networks. We ended up moving, or you end up you end up going and looking for alternatives. And I think that's what ends up happening, and you just sort of deal with it. But I do think that Highway has more leverage, far more leverage than Motive does, because ultimately there are plenty of ELD providers. Highway has 80% of market share in loads, not in terms of total install base. The largest brokers are using Highway. I just feel like Highway's going to win this.
And how do you save face if you're Motive through this now at this point?
You think it's a face issue? Like
No, I mean, well, I think...
Do you think they've lost credibility?
No, but how do you back this out? You just come out and say...
They sort of agree. You can agree to a settlement. This is no different than a lawsuit, because you can say, hey, the party settled, it's confidential, and then everyone forgets about it.
Yeah, that's the best outcome.
Weeks. I think that's probably what happens, because here's the reason I think it's a problem for Motive. It fundamentally comes down to this. They want to go public. They filed an S1 to do an IPO. The investors, because I think this is what it's all about, are going to care about total install base, total number of trucks and fleets that have their technology, retention, and churn.
That's where
those are the metrics that matter. The investors are not going to care that they make a couple $1 million off highway. They're just not. It's just a rounding error. But what they care deeply about is install base. And that install base is what's going to drive the outcome. And I think you're going to see some motive carriers that are dependent upon brokerage freight, where highways installed, are going to have to make a choice. Do they walk away from those freight opportunities, or do they look for a new provider? Now, the counter argument that is that Motive has these long-term contracts. So regardless, these poor fleets are left in the middle of this giant pissing contest between two very large companies. And it's going to play out. And I think that Highway has the advantage because of the leverage.
Yep. We'll see what happens.
Follow the money, as I always say, as we say here on the show. Let's move on to something else. Let's move on to autonomous vehicles. We have the Chief Commercial Officer of Avride. Avride is all about autonomous vehicles and delivery robots. We have the Chief Commercial Officer. How are you doing, Sergei?
Hey, hi. Doing good. Thank you very much.
Well, tell us a little bit about what's going on with you guys. Where are we at in the autonomous vehicle implementation?
Well, we actually currently operate in two large areas. One is the Austin area, mostly with our R&D rights. We have probably about 150 to 200 vehicles running here for basically the sole purpose is advancing the technology. And we are deployed in Dallas on Uber platform, where we have over 60 cars basically making rides with passengers on a daily basis.
So this is all passenger cars, not trucks.
These are passenger cars, but we actually have several hundreds of small trucks doing actually deliveries, which are like we call them rovers or like robots, as a like suitcase size, fully autonomous vehicles, and we already have several hundreds of them, and we're progressing very fast. We work on Uber and Grubhub platforms in Jersey City, Philly, Austin, Dallas, Miami, and we're present at over 25 college campuses with these bots.
Okay, so it is delivery robots, so delivering food, whatever you order via Uber Eats or Uber Delivery. It's not Uber Eats anymore, I guess, right? It's called something else because they deliver
Uber Eats. Is it
they deliver way more than just food, but yes.
I get Uber Eats. I don't know if it's still, is this still called, Sergei, is it called Uber Eats? We're going to debate this until we know.
I think it is still Uber Eats, but we don't work just with Uber Eats. We also work with the Grubhub in the college campuses and in the cities, and we also had a number of pilots with the grocery delivery. So we actually deliver multiple types of products, or basically providing a supply for a logistics layer. So our goal not to build a particular car or a robot. Our goal is to basically build a driver which can be applied to basically any type of chassis, and though can be used for different type of like services.
Yep. And then there's also the driverless cars via actually Uber passenger vehicles, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So I imagine that the driver, though, and you're talking about it being able to be used in multiple applications, which we've talked about with some other autonomous companies as well, and how cool that context is and being able to change it. But I imagine operating on sidewalks versus operating on the road is pretty different. Are they trained very differently?
Well, the core of the technology is basically the same. Then we're definitely making certain adjustments. We collect additional data sets that are specific to the sidewalk operations. But having the core, which was originally designed to manage such a complicated task as managing a vehicle at the roads, basically make our robots probably the most advanced robots in the market. But definitely, there is certain customization for the particular use case and for the size and for the type of the chassis. Multiple changes were made in the core tech to make it happen.
So, Sergei, I have seen these around college campuses. My son entered Baylor University, and we were doing tours. We see these rovers. I'm just curious, what is the most unusual thing that you've seen around college campuses in terms of, is it late nights? Like, what, these things...
You imagine college kids just messing with the robots?
No, I mean, like, actually, I'm curious about the activity. Are these late night pizza runs, or do they get the munchies after a night out? Like, what's the types of things that you guys see?
Yeah, the midnight hunger is something like special, especially during the, in the end of the semester, when kids are getting ready for exams and stuff like that. We actually extended service hours across the college campuses during last year, and it added substantial amount of orders to our daily deliveries. Of course, there's all kind of, jokes around robots. So sometimes kids like to have fun, try to put the robots into like a tricky situation. You can find tons of funny videos on TikTok and other platforms.
I think we saw one that was, again, I think it was AI, or at least people said it rolled off the back of into a pier into the ocean. I don't know, you probably saw this one. A couple.
Yeah, I think I understand. Oh, yeah, I think that was pure. That's 99% that was an AI. I doubt that can actually happen with any of the players who is like seriously present in the market, just because all this tech is like map based, and we definitely define the areas where robots shouldn't be going, and it will anyway detect the end of the pier or end of the road, even if that was like allowed to go there.
There was some great memes about it ending its life, rough rides, all sorts of sort of jokes. Unfortunately, at your expense in some ways. But Sergei, I would like to get into some specifics, because Julie brings up something that in terms of the controversy around autonomous vehicles, we've seen, as you talk about college kids doing things, but also there's a level of anger in autonomous, just overall concern, fear. Just these are polarizing conversations, particularly in our community, because we have a lot of professional truck drivers. What is it that you see that can protect the actual equipment from vandalism?
Well, I think first of all, consumers like public should get used to that. We definitely usually see the spike on any, let's say, I would say unnormal activity when we just launch in a new place. Then it goes down over the time. Usually after 1 year of operation in one place, people just get used to that. People start understand all the benefits of having those, because actually specifically talking about like robots, even I think it also applies with the rides too, because autonomous cars and autonomous delivery robots, they basically start from the tasks that usually couriers, I can't say hate, or definitely like try to avoid, because like we are automating the routine, and the routine, like the short ride, short distance in tough places where there's no place to park to drop off the order. Like short, repetitive rides in a city downtown in a dense environment. So I think as the industry matures, the negative side will be significantly like reduced in terms of perception. We also do a lot of activities in terms of community engagement and like working with the communities to explain all the benefits and to explain the safety for our products. And that also gives like a good result. So we definitely see some improvements here compared to the early days of autonomous vehicle deployments. I'm located in Austin, where we are headquartered here. And I remember the time when we just were about to make like a first steps, but the number of operators already been present in the city. I remember absolutely wild things that have been happening. We can't see that anymore, while the number of autonomous vehicles like dramatically increased in the town. So I think it is just a matter of like a maturity of the deployment and maturity of the just perception.
Yeah, I can see that. I love how wholesome you made the late night food deliveries on college campuses when they're towards the end of the semester, when they're staying up late studying.
We know that's not true, Sergei. I have a 19-year-old. He's not in the library.
Stop at Ian's Pizza or Qdoba at bar close on my way home.
Yeah,
we also only had delivery options of like pizza or Jimmy John's, and they would bike.
We had the late night
exactly what you just mentioned. There was not parking on the campus that I went to, so this makes so much sense. I have kind of an off-the-wall question, and I want to ask about how you guys designed what these delivery robots look like, because I think they're kind of cute, honestly. And was that intentional, like, or was it solely functional? Specifically,
it's a very good question.
Robots. Obviously, the parts are normal, but
it's a very good question. Yeah. Kind of, we have no ambition to build a car because the cars exist, but we had to actually develop the robot, and its design as actually predefined by a number of things. First of all, the compartment actually designed to fit like a standard large pizza. Basically, it holds the 16-inch pizza box plus some insulation on the side. Plus, it has some space to put some beverage, like drinks, aside. So we don't have to put it on top of like a pizza box, so your pizza isn't spoiled. So, and from the outside appearance, specifically, we found this very useful. This animated face actually adds the cuteness and some sort of personality to the device, and we actually noticed a dramatic decrease of vandalism when we introduced that, because people start associating that with a kind of a live creature with some personality. So they are not less in position to, go harass.
That makes so much sense. We have a place in town, a Japanese restaurant that I swear my kids like to go to 90% just because a robot delivers to your delivers the food to your table. By the mall. It's like, a Japanese steakhouses.
And we're going to talk about this. I need to learn about this place.
But it's cute, and that's why they like it. And it has cat ears, and it has a face similar to this, and that's like what they get excited about. And I think that it does.
And it blinks.
It forces like a connection versus.
It can speak, yeah. So all those human accents, they add personality, and they're actually reduce the risk of it's being vandalized.
Sergei, what is the biggest sort of, the timeline is a big question, I think, for a lot of people. The delivery robots make sense on a college campus. They make sense in urban environments. I mean, New York City's, you could get almost anything delivered for the city for decades, because that is, with high concentrations of people, it's very easy to do that. I live out in the country. Julie lives in the suburbs. We care more about when are we going to be able to get autonomous delivery stuff to our houses in the suburbs. And I know this is happening in certain cities, but it's not ubiquitous. What is the timeline from your perspective?
Well, I totally agree. The efficient range that the robot can service is actually quite small. It's a very good fit for college campuses and dense city environment, but definitely to service larger areas and more customers, we need a solution that can cover a longer range. And basically this solution is called autonomous car. robotaxis are not the only application that car can support. Robotaxis sounds very natural because it's actually technically a little more, I would say, it's a little easier to deploy like a taxis from just partnership perspective, because basically you have a ride-hailing platform, you have a taxi operator, and then you have like the final customers. In delivery space, you also have like a merchant or the other partner that basically has to load the robot, and you have to basically unload the order at the drop-off point. So it's a little bit more complicated from the operational standpoint. But we see great potential with delivery by autonomous vehicles. So answering to the question when, some of the deliveries can start relatively quickly. Something that can fit into the trunk of the passenger car can be delivered pretty soon. Talking about some bigger loads, it mostly depends on the availability of the platform, car platform, which is capable of delivering the larger parcels or the larger orders, whatever it is. But we are thinking a lot about getting into the space, and some of our competitors already tried that, and we are also very optimistic about launching delivery by autonomous cars. And we think it's a great market and great opportunity.
So speaking of your competitors, there are probably dozens working in this autonomous space with Uber. What differentiates you all from the fray or the rest?
Well, actually, there aren't that many who actually deployed. There are very few companies that actually doing rides on Uber or on their own platform. I think what differentiates us is first, we are actually moving really fast, and our actual fleets that we deployed are actually pretty large, much larger compared to the majority of the competition. We all have almost 300 cars operational in both locations. It's a pretty big number. There are very few players who have more cars actually on the roads. So we might be speaking not as loud about scaling plans, because we just try to be realistic about the timelines. But we also have foregoing plans of scaling into at least 3 markets in 2028 and going further afterwards. I think another very important differentiation point is that actually the fact that we have these delivery robots increases significantly our knowledge and intelligence on the operational side and scaling side of the business. Even though they are much smaller, these are still almost 1,000 of autonomous vehicles actually deployed. So together, robots and cars, we're way over 1,000 already. So that actually sets us to the top of the range in these, AV company rating. And this is a very important experience that we're getting. Very few other companies have actually reached that level of intelligence and knowledge about the space.
Yeah, so the data and the knowledge and the learnings from the robots applies to the robo-taxis and all of that as well. I think that's so cool. So you spoke of continuing to expand to 3 more cities by 2028, and that right now you're on college campuses, and part of the I guess one of the hurdles is the delivery distance, right, for the robots. But what are the other hurdles remaining for this to become more widespread and adopted across more areas in the country?
Well, first of all, it's with regards to deliveries, it's mostly limited with the availability of the infrastructure. So business that consume logistics as a product is not yet tailored for autonomous deliveries in full. So the lack of infrastructure reduces the conversion of the rides and reduces the a potential number of a potential addressable market in the space. That's a big challenge that we're working on together with our partners. On the autonomous vehicle side, it is definitely the development of the tech itself. So our rides currently are all supervised. So there is a number of things that needs to be done. So we switch to a fully unsupervised mode. That's truly on our side. But also, as we progress, the infrastructure around it also needs to be updated. That includes availability of autonomous car platforms from the car manufacturers. That includes the charging capacity. That includes depot availability and a lot of other factors.
All right, Sergei, when are we going to see 100% potential for autonomous? And I know you get asked that often. And I know it's an annoying question because we get asked this all the time from people who don't know trucking. But is this a 2035 where I will expect to get my food deliveries from the autonomous and not the local DoorDash delivery person? Or is this going to be when are we going to get rid of the humans inside these delivery vehicles? I'm mostly worried about food. It's 12:40. We care about food here. We're hungry. So what are we looking at?
I don't like the language about getting rid of humans. We are in a partnership here, but I think it can come much quicker. So I actually think that in the larger cities by 2030, the majority of deliveries done in downtown or let's say dense areas will be already done by different type of automated delivery devices or cars. I think it's totally possible. I think 2028, 2029 will be the years of the massive scaling of this technology to any sphere, every sphere of our life.
It's not long away, Sergei. Well, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming into FreightWaves today. We are hungry here. You got to tell me where this Japanese restaurant is.
Right for the mall.
What is it called? You don't even know the name of it?
Maybe, I don't know. No,
Is it Ichiban? Kampai? All right, we're gonna figure out where this place is so I can take my kids. Come back. We'll talk about sonar. You don't know the name.
The drivers, dispatchers, mechanics, and crews who keep the world moving deserve tools that work as hard as they do. That's what Samsara builds, technology for safer, more efficient operations, made with the people who do the work. Samsara, built with operators for operators. Learn more at samsara.com.
The world doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3. the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference. It's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else, the connections that change the trajectory of your business, the relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Today. Let's talk sonar data. It's right before Labor Day, a week before. Julie, this is always the time. Again, post-Labor Day, it sort of kicks off that holiday surge, that third quarter surge. Peak season is upon us, we'll say. What are we looking at right now?
Okay, so we're looking at tender rejections, and you can see, and this is 1 year. So you can see, that we have fallen a bit, but we're leveling out.
13.5% continuation of what we talked about is no difference. Do we expect this to start to surge next week into Labor Day? Because it's interesting that it has not moved. Let's go back. Oh, you've got it. No, you're fine.
Yeah,
you got it right here. It's interesting that it has not moved much and I know that Labor Day is a week later. It's hard to remember that we're at the end of the month, and yet we still have another week before Labor Day. But it's interesting, it has not moved yet. If you see past years, it started moving earlier.
Started coming up.
But we will start to see it. We should see it starting this weekend and next, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can really look at all of the previous years. 2025, we started coming up here. This is mid-August, and then certainly had a bit of a peak right here at Labor Day. When you go back and look at 2023, really this similar thing. Here we are, August starts. You see it just kind of a slow, steady uptick. Last year was 2024 was a bit steadier, but still had that small Labor Day peak.
Pink, magenta is in 2023. Green is in 2024. Yellow is in 2025. It's consistent on-site of sonar. Those are the years. And then now in blue, we have 2026. We peaked up here above 17.5% is really the peak of this cycle. It's consolidated. Someone asked me, what was I thinking going into Labor Day? We would see rejection rates peak at. I was thinking we would get into the 18s, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think we will see. We should expect it to firm, but maybe by the it's also the week after Labor Day that also you tend to see rejection rates because there's a lot of freight that's left over. It's a busy week that week. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. Do we get it?
I'm not a forecaster, but if I had to bet, I would think we're in the 15s. Like, it's not going to be huge. 15s.
Yeah, 15%. Not a surge, which honestly, we talked about the orderliness. Now,
Healthy.
One thing to point out is that there is some question about volume in certain parts of, I've talked to a number of carriers who are not feeling as robust. A lot of that has to do with momentum. No one's screaming about the freight market right now in terms of things are bad, but it feels very orderly.
Yep.
We're not seeing big surge in spot rates.
We haven't seen demand pick up, right? It's been pretty steady. And as we've talked about over and over again, this cycle is
the railroads are taking a lot of freight.
Yes.
An enormous amount of freight from the truckload, particularly on those long haul markets.
But I do think as we get into Labor Day and come out of Labor Day and we get closer to peak season, that I will be watching that demand, those volume numbers, market by market particularly. We'll see if the coasts start picking up, and that will be a telltale sign.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of this, like you said, has to do with the rail intermodal freight. It's taken a lot of that long haul freight off the roads. and therefore we're not seeing it sort of peak the way it is. It feels very, like I said, you said, very, very orderly.
Yep. Same story here with spot rates, right? Where we saw that same sort of level of...
These are van spot rates, $329 a mile. We peaked above $380. I want to remind everybody that the peak in trucking spot rates was, I think, $358 a mile. And we blew past that a couple of months ago. And now we are right at $329. This would have been a great rate. I mean, even if you go back to where we were earlier this year, just go back to where we were in April. The $329 would be a fantastic rate.
Yeah, so spot rates might be down 2.5% month over month, right? We're holding steady. But when you look at them compared to prior years, we're still up 44% year over year to where we were last year. So still significantly healthier market. And year over year, I didn't pull contract rates because I think spot tells more of a story of what's happening right now. But year over year, contract rates are up 17%.
Yeah, and spot rates are, as they always do, pull on contract rates.
Exactly.
They always pull up or pull down. But there's still a significant delta. In other words, spot is still much higher than spot is much higher than contract. So we're going to continue to see that pull through.
Yeah, now that gap is closing as spot rates are, as contract rates are coming up, as they should, to be able to continue to get the routing guides to hold up, right?
And look, I think we know this, the economy, the freight economy, the rail data, we get AAR's data every single Wednesday. The rail freight is still robust, particularly in bulk. We're going to get into that in just a few minutes with Bill Stevens, the editor of Trains. He's going to tell us all about what is the news in the rail market. Stay with us.
The world doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference, it's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else, the connections that change the trajectory of your business, the relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
Welcome back to FreightWaves today. It's almost our favorite. Actually, Friday might be the favorite time of year. So we're combining my favorite day of the week, which is the AAR rail day, to talk about some trains, with Friday, which is everybody's favorite day of the week. And to talk about that, we have Bill Stevens coming to us from the North Carolina Transportation Museum. Bill, welcome back. What's going on, man? What are you doing in North Carolina?
Well, today is the opening day of the America 250 locomotive celebration here at the North Carolina Transportation Museum. And we're a sponsor, and we have 34 locomotives here, I believe, that are red, white, and blue for the most part. There's some of them gathered around the roundhouse turntable. They came from as far away as California and Minnesota and Florida and the Northeast. And there's a TTX boxcar on the turntable there. We've got 5 of those and a red, white, and blue caboose as well. Those locomotives right there were really the inspiration for this. They were among 8 locomotives gathered in 1975 as part of the bicentennial. And it was this iconic Trains magazine photo of these 8 locomotives gathered. And they inspired this event because that was just a pre-social media, pre-internet era. It was just a private event and one guy up in a bucket truck taking a photo. And we thought, why not do that, but invite everyone and make it a party. And so there's going to be more than 5,000 people here this weekend.
Well, where is Spencer, North Carolina, Bill?
It is about 45 minutes northeast of Charlotte off of I-85.
Now, are these CSX or Norfolk's lines, or is it?
It's Norfolk Southern.
Okay.
It's Norfolk Southern. It's an old Norfolk Southern, or Southern Railway, I should say, shop complex.
And did they decommission the old rail lines and is the museum, or what's the sort of story there?
This is on the main line between Charlotte and Raleigh, so it gets passenger service. It also sees freight service, and it's a junction between 2 Norfolk Southern lines. So it's a busy corridor. This shop facility was redundant, though, and so it lay dormant for a while. I'm told the sides of the shop building, which is just this beautiful, huge brick and steel structure, was covered with kudzu when they opened up as a museum, and had a lot of renovation work to do there. But the building is stout and does its thing.
Really cool.
But
I believe that kudzu in the Carolinas the Carolinas are beautiful, and I lived there when I was in middle school. But we think there's kudzu here, and it isn't
Did you know? I watched this documentary on kudzu. I mean, I nerd out as a 47-year-old dad sitting on weekends watching YouTubes. I watched this whole thing that kudzu, the government encouraged planting of kudzu.
Why?
It had to do with something to do with erosion, and they were trying to avoid erosion.
But then it just
it ended up, well, it was part of the USDA was actually encouraging people to plant it, and then they realized it was an invasive species, and started to actually have to destroy it.
There's got to be something we can do with kudzu. Somebody watching has to have some genius idea of what you can do with kudzu if you harvest it.
If you harvest it,
there should be something you can make.
Well, this crazy thing is they brought a beetle in to eat it. And then they found that it actually destroyed some of the
other things.
Crops.
Of course,
yes, of course. It's just man versus nature. Nature always wins, Bill.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the nature. Go ahead.
I was going to tell you something you'd probably be interested in was my visit to Guadalajara, Mexico, earlier in the week on my way to Spencer, because it's on the way from Massachusetts. Yeah. Was invited down with the analyst Tony Hatch to visit with Grupo Mexico Transportes, the largest Mexico in railroad, largest Mexican railroad. They've kind of shunned the spotlight over the years, and because they're part of the larger Grupo Mexico conglomerate, Grupo Mexico is one of the largest mining companies in the world. They just haven't gotten a lot of attention. You hear much about them, but they are the fastest growing Class 1 railroad year to date. And they are gaining share from rail, they're gaining share from the highway, and gaining share from the water. There are short sea moves of Mexican manufactured automobiles that leave from the port of Veracruz on barges and then are taken to U.S. ports. and a joint venture rail ferry service that they have with Genesee and Wyoming. The volume is so strong and demand is so strong, and they're taking share from those barges that they've ordered 2 more rail ferries that can carry 150 cars each.
Okay, so Bill, for those of us who are not rail aficionados, as you are, what is a rail ferry?
So think of, I think they're 115 feet long. They have 2 decks and they have tracks on them. And they will very carefully shove cars onto these tracks from the land at the Port of Mobile, for example, put chocks on them to hold them down, and then they sail them across the Gulf of Mexico and reach the other side. It is faster, depending on your origin in the U.S., to get there that way than going via rail.
Okay, that I would love to see.
I would
think it would be
too,
so
Bill.
cool, and it makes them. You don't have to transload. Like
No,
it just.
this is
so
intermodal at its finest, interrail. This is news to me. I'm not aware.
You didn't know either. Good, then I felt.
No, I did not know about this.
Okay.
This is interesting technology. Bill, we need some photos of this. Maybe an article in explain what this is.
I was there when a couple of years ago when they christened those rail ferries with ginormous bottle of champagne, smashed it on the hull, and did a story on it. So I'll send that along to you. But the other thing that was, and the other thing that was interesting was the efforts that Grupo Mexico, which operates Ferromex and Ferrosur in Mexico, takes to prevent cargo theft. It's a very high security operation. They, in 2016, made a strategy shift where they decided that rather than put armed guards on trains, they needed to have a much more proactive approach. And so they have a security monitoring center that monitors every train, but most particularly their intermodal and automotive trains, which are the high priority targets if you're into stealing stuff. And they send armed guards out in front of the trains, basically. They have drones that will surveil the area around the tracks, and they look out for bad guys, basically. The trains themselves are monitored. They know that from the security center, they can tell the train speed, the air brake line pressure, which indicates that you're all good to go. And then cameras on the locomotive, looking forward out the engineer's window and out the conductor's window as well. And they've really been able to cut down on incidents. I think the most recent week they had 30,000 shipments overall, and they had 72 incidents. Of those, most of them were just open seals on containers, and there was nothing actually
Well,
pilfered
Bill, are you going to do an article on this? You're going to go in depth of the.
Yes, I am. And what's interesting about this, it's everything seems to be a little bit of a flip side of the cargo theft issue here in the U.S. Like in the Southwest U.S., we're told that it's international crime syndicates that are breaking into containers and making off with consumer goods and other items. In Mexico, the problem is more local gangs. And they have a local range where they may vary 30 miles this way, 30 miles that way. And there are hotspots that will pop up. The National Guard is involved in their security center where they have Ferromex people monitoring their network. They also have a member of the National Guard who is there. He's really his spot because he's wearing camouflage. But they also are taking all these steps with the National Guard to enforce the law there. And they use 30 mobile trailers that house National Guard members, and they put them near these hotspots, and they feed them and pay for the housing. And then in exchange, the National Guard goes out and responds quickly to any criminal activity along the tracks.
So
and then here in the U.S.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I didn't want to interrupt. You're on a roll.
Here in the U.S., it's local prosecutors who are primarily dealing with the cargo theft problem, and the AAR and the railroads and retailers as well are in favor of a bill in Congress that would really federalize this and create a much more coordinated federal, state, local response to the problem. And here in Mexico,
I think you just called for Corca, and
that's it exactly.
Matt Leffler. It's like a genie in a bottle.
Happy.
Can we pull Matt Leffler up because he's dancing?
He's so happy.
He's dancing
Corca,
about Corca because he's been advocating for Corca for some time. It's like you call for something, he shows up. Or it could be freight expectations.
Bill, what year did you say they removed the armed guards?
It was 2016 when they decided that they needed a new strategy, and it definitely seems to be working.
So one of my career where we were working with that, and I remember
one
that.
quick question. I have one quick question, Bill. Is the reason that they're not roving nationally like we see in the U.S. is because the gangs, these individual gangs, have territories, and if you entrench on my territory, then I'm going to kill you? Is that sort of the problem?
I don't know. It seemed almost like it's a local problem, and sometimes the gangs will derail a train, which happened recently, and then townspeople will join in and loot the train, unfortunately, as well. And so they think of it more as a local problem, and these hotspots kind of move around as they try to tamp things down.
I'm sure that it's gotten significantly more advanced, but whenever I met with railroads a lot when I was doing intermodal pricing and heavily involved in that at US Express, and it tended then to be, and they had the armed guards on certain places, anywhere the train was going relatively slow versus when it's going really fast, then they would.
Although there's a great article. There's a great article in Trains from a couple of months ago about these trains going 30 miles per hour and people jumping on them from the what's the pass I can't ever pronounce it.
Well, there's Cajon and there's Tehachapi, and both of them have this problem. Mm-hmm.
Bill's got a great man. I always learn
something from Bill. Now I know what a rail ferry is.
I want to see this thing. And by the way, real quick question before we go: are rail ferries new, or is this sort of like a reintroduction of old technology, Bill?
In New York City alone, they used to have to get freight and passengers from Manhattan to New Jersey. They carried like 600,000 loads a year, as recently as, say, the 1930s and 40s. And then they just went away for the most part.
Awesome.
But there are a few operations like the one across the Gulf of Mexico, and then also from the Seattle area up to Alaska.
Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, like
Ontario. We're still waiting for our Alaska invite, Bill. We'll have you back next week. We got to have some great photos of your favorite library. We're big fans of library here on FreightWaves Today. We'll be right back with Matt Leffler at Freight Expectations. Stay with us.
In today's supply chain, every mile and every minute matters. Shippers, lessors, and railroads count on performance they can trust. That's where Trinity Rail delivers. With integrated railcar solutions including manufacturing, maintenance, parts, fleet management, and leasing, helping you reduce downtime, optimize your fleet, and stay ahead of demand. Because efficiency isn't a goal, it's a competitive edge. Trinity Rail, built to deliver.
The world doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference, it's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else, the connections that change the trajectory of your business, the relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
What's the masterclass all about? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you're a driver, you're an owner-operator, you're a fleet owner, whether you're in compliance services, dispatcher, no matter what it is, masterclass is for you. Every 2 weeks, you're going to sit down with me, and we're going to go over certain business topics that are related specifically to your small trucking company operations. We're going to help you with everything from compliance to how to negotiate better on the spot board, how to find direct freight, and everything in between. This is the reason why you don't want to miss out on masterclass. It's about an hour to an hour and a half, and then on top of that, you'll have the library to you so that way you can always research and reflect back onto it. Don't miss out this opportunity. This is built specifically for you. I'm excited, and I hope to see you in class.
If you hear the ominous music, you know it's that time of the week. It is Freight Expectations with Matt Leffler. How are you, Matt?
My ears have been hurting, Craig, because everyone keeps clamoring. They're clamoring for Freight Expectations, but even more so, it appears people are clamoring for CORCA, Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. I love to talk about trains, and I love talking about trying to stop fraud in our industry.
Let's talk about that. Bill Stevens, our trains editor, came on to FreightWaves today, was talking about CORCA specifically. The crime issue is out of control. It is rampant. What are we going to do about it? The Congress can't seem to get their act together. What is the deal here, Matt?
We are so close. We're so close. So the House passed CORCA. Again, this is a bipartisan piece of legislation, over 160 co-sponsors. Literally every association in the industry is backing CORCA, from ATA to TIA, IANA, and every other alphabet soup. But what has happened is it stalled out in the Senate. Well, the Senate is clever, and the Senate has always been known to be clever. So in this recent National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, that has put CORCA in it. So CORCA is now part of the Defense Authorization Act. That has to go back to the House to get passed, but it feels like we're getting closer every single day to doing something about combating organized retail crime, and that something is CORCA. And again, it's been around for a long time, and we just can't get it across the finish line.
But Matt, why is the Senate not, why wouldn't they just go ahead and pass it? Was this a way to get the Defense Authorization Act done, and as a way of like, look, we know this is sort of a very favorable piece of legislation, and therefore it's just put it in there as an incentive to pass the Defense Authorization Act? Like, what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to defer to our mutual friend Ann Rinke over at IANA to kind of better understand, because she's the whisperer of Congress. But I think what ends up happening is, I think you're right. I think the Senate understood that Corca was incredibly popular. Everybody wants it. And so let's make it part of something that maybe other people aren't as excited about. So this National Defense Authorization Act, it does a lot of stuff, including putting money aside for the ongoing conflicts across the globe. But I suspect that when it does get back to the House, I can't imagine them not passing it. I would love to see Corca pulled out separately and just done on its own, but things don't work the way that we typically want them to.
Politicians have got a politician. That's the reality. Look, I think everyone is for Corca. I mean, these stories, it's interesting because we talk about the majority of our audience understands the trucking problem, because this is, for those that are not in the industry, that are just tuning in to this show randomly, it came across your YouTube channel. It's the good-looking host that you clicked on. You're probably not aware of the proliferation of trucking crime and how often this is, but on FreightWaves, we cover it every single day. We have 3 top stories that we cover on FreightWaves today, and I think on every single day, almost, not every day, but almost every day, there's some story about crime, some major crime that happened. This is persistent. I don't think our audience is as aware of the other modes of traffic that are suffering from the very same issues. Rail cargo theft is a major issue. It's continued. People open up rail cars as they're traveling, people stealing rail cargo. Bill Stevens just went over on FreightWaves today that have the Mexicans are dealing with it. They seem to be, frankly, far more advanced at dealing with this problem. But in fairness, they've had to deal with it for decades. There's a lot more crime in Mexico, and therefore private industry is making the investments. I think in the United States, a lot of times the private sector really looks to the law enforcement, to the government officials to deal with it, although the railroads have their own law enforcement departments. But it does feel like the Mexicans are sort of setting the standard for how to deal with these criminal syndicates.
Yeah, I mean, the real issue when it comes to understanding the cargo theft and the fraud that we see in transportation in the United States is a story of opportunistic stealing. So break in the back of a trailer, break in the back of a container and get the stuff that's inside of there. But what we've seen growing, and this is the thing you have been covering for such a long time, we've been talking about for such a long time, is the use of organized criminal cartels. So on the Mexican side of the border, I mean, that's what they're experiencing every single day, is the cartels going after and targeting freight. So they have to build up the infrastructure to combat that. In America, we kind of look at cargo theft and fraud like we look at retail shrink. I mean, anybody who's ever worked in retail, myself included, I worked at KB Toys, I worked at Best Buy, and you'd say, stop shrink, stomp the shrink, stomp the shrink. And that's people stealing stuff out of the store. Well, if it's one person grabbing a video game or grabbing a DVD, there's not a lot you could really do other than having someone with a yellow shirt say, hey, can I see a copy of your receipt? But when you start looking at what's happening at our industry right now and the scale that it's growing, it is organized criminal cartels that know exactly what's inside that box. They know exactly where they're going to get rid of that merchandise and sell it or export it out of the country. And that's what's become so troubling, because local law enforcement is not designed to combat organized criminal cartels. They're just not. And even private sector businesses, there's great companies like Highway and Genlox that are out there every single day building up technology to stop this. But these are private companies. They are not able to combat that organized criminal syndicates. That's why we need our government to step in. And they're trying, they desperately want to do this, but it requires Congress to act. And Congress has got a lot of interesting priorities, and it doesn't really always jive with our industry.
Well, a lot of it's law enforcement, right? Ultimately, you can track, you can identify there's a problem. Somebody needs to go prosecute them, and oftentimes it's overseas. I mean, it's the big problem with a lot of the theft that we see is this stuff is organized from overseas and coordinated from overseas. And really it comes up to the FBI to coordinate with foreign governments, which may or may not be cooperative. In fact, they may be on the take. At least some of their politicians are. And that's one of the problems you have in some of these countries is just that they are on the take. I want to do a shout out to our sponsor, Freight Expectations. We work hard to deliver for our audience. And Centerline trailer insurance. This is like, you could not have picked a more appropriate sponsor to a show that involves Matt Leffler than Centerline, which is offering trailer insurance. The CEO of Centerline was on the show a couple of weeks ago or on FreightWaves today and told us that a lot of the policies out there that are for overall property and casualty are not protecting you from trailer issues. So just keep that in mind. Matt, I don't know if you have anything to expand on this.
The most important asset, and this is controversial, Craig. I know we're going to lose some viewers, we're going to lose some listeners, and I understand this, but the most important asset in transportation and logistics is the trailer. It's a 53-foot van with swing doors, maybe a 28-foot pup with a roll-up door. Regardless of your suspension, spring, or air ride, the reality is everything that you want is inside that box. The drivers are super important. The trucks are super important. But the trailer, that's what the receiver cares about. That's what the shipper cares about. And that's what you, the American consumer, cares about. So when I start thinking about the 5 million trailers on the road today, it is something that fills me with hope and joy because trailers need to get smarter, and they're getting smarter every day. So I love when anyone wants to talk about trailers because that's the things that put food on my table and puts things on people's shelves.
Well, Centerline is recommending everybody to review their insurance policies. They'll do it for you. Call them and have them do it, particularly as it relates to trailers, which is a very different thing. I knew you would love that, Matt. It's so on point.
Trailer interchange agreements. Everything's about trailers. You can't have autonomous trucks, Craig, unless you have smart, well-maintained trailers. And just like freight is out there safely being delivered on time and undamaged, we are safely delivering the news on time and generally undamaged.
Well, it may be damaged, depends on your perspective. if you're a recipient of bad news. Matt, I want to talk about something that is really, I think a lot of people are talking about right now in trucking, is Chris Spear has resigned early, 2 years early, from his contract at the American Truckers Association. Trucking associations, I always say trucker, it's trucking associations is what they call themselves. And it's interesting they have an S, because most of the time you want to say trucking association, but they would argue that it's associations. But let's talk a little bit about Chris Spear's early resignation. My understanding from talking to people is that this has been going on, the conversation has been going on for some time. There's been some displeasure related to his tenure in recent years, largely due to the financial condition of the ATA and the lack of financial performance, not necessarily policy. I talked to someone last night that has been working with Chris on the Hill on issues involving things like tort reform and other major trucking issues, and said he was fantastic on the Hill. But it seems like there was some displeasure inside the organization. Perhaps some of the leadership was upset about the financial performance of the ATA. Any insights here, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of build off of this, so the American Trucking Associations is the group that represents the trucking industry, both in Congress and then all the state associations. So the Illinois Trucking Association, the Tennessee Trucking Association, the Texas Trucking Association. These aren't always like they're all nonprofits, but sometimes they lose more than they're supposed to. I don't know anything specifically about Chris Spear and the departure that he had, but I will say that some of the things he pushed for in terms of like environmental regulations, of trying to push back against the EPA's overreach on new types of powertrains. Like, there's really great work that the ATA and other associations have done. Part of the challenge, I think, and maybe this is what ends up being the story, maybe it's about financial stuff, but also it's about the story that the ATA has been telling the American people for many, many years, which is that there's a shortage of truck drivers. And the reality, we see this every single day, is there is not. And the work of the FMCSA, among others, is to show that by keeping that narrative alive and being associated with that narrative ultimately means you are telling a story that is not true. And when you do that story and you reduce the barriers to enter, then you see this explosion of all the bad things we see in the industry, from out-of-service equipment to drivers that can't speak English to drivers who don't live in the country legally. And that might be part of the overall story. It might take a long time to figure out exactly why Chris is gone, but now is an opportunity, Craig. If you're looking for making new content, I think he might be available to host a show for you.
I don't think Chris Spear would ever take me up even if I offered. And we tried to, there was a number of folks that were trying to get us together arguing that that Chris and I working on issues, or at least advocating for issues or talking about issues together on things that we agreed on, was more important than having this battle that, look, frankly, he would pick a fight. I wrote out years ago that there was no driver shortage, an article that I, frankly, was using research to talk about. When I first, I grew up as a multi-generational trucking Nepo baby, and growing up in the industry, I was always told there was a truck driver shortage. It was accepted wisdom that there was a truck driver shortage. And then as we got into the data at Sonar and started to really look at the data, and I remember in 2019 when the freight market had its big downturn in 2019, and there was we called it the bloodbath of 2019, and there was an enormous amount of bankruptcies. That was when I really started to hone in on the question, how could you possibly have a truck driver shortage, but have this continuation and build of new drivers into the industry? It just didn't make sense. And this collapse in market conditions, because ultimately it's a commodity, freight's a commodity, and therefore this didn't match up to reality. And so my view is that the ATA's position on the truck driver shortage was in many ways responsible, or at least partially responsible, for the collapse in freight market conditions, because it was a continuation of a lowers the barrier of entry. And when you lower the barrier to entry, what you end up getting is you end up flooding the market full of capacity, which is truck drivers, many of them unregulated, unregistered, unaware of the rules, or unconcerned of the rules. And we got a safety, security, and economic crisis really happened at the same time. And yet still, as of August or last summer, this was a summer ago of last year, might have been July, August, I don't remember that time frame, but it was late summer of last year, Chris Spear was still on the Hill arguing that there's a truck driver shortage. And he was using the average salaries of truck drivers and saying you can't have increase in salaries and still have a truck driver shortage. Except what he failed to actually mention was that the majority of those driver wages were Teamsters drivers related to the UPS contract. That's the problem, is the facts were something that he seemed to either be confused about, did not want to believe, or ignored, and it really destroyed a lot of the credibility of the ATA, was this division. When I think some of what perhaps was his demise was this desire to be right than honest. And the fact that he was willing to go out there on a continuous basis and argue for a truck driver shortage that clearly the data did not exist and support is, I think, the reason he got shut.
I agree with you there. I think what I look at is he looked at a symptom, and inferred the cause. He looked at his members that were the most vocal in the organization, the large asset-based motor carriers, big trucking companies, and they saw, hey, we have 10 drivers we hire and we lost 12. We have this issue of constant churn and we don't ever have enough meat for the grinder. And if you look at the problem from the perspective of the large asset-based motor carriers, what they really were saying was, we can't find people who want to do this job for what we're paying them and the conditions that they get. And it becomes an issue of retention. When you talk to small trucking companies, they look at the ATA with bewilderment, like, you're not here to support me. You're not here to do anything to help my business, because when you lower the barriers to enter, it means that me and my own family aren't going to eat as well, because we're competing with people that are unqualified or undocumented. And that is the story. And the reality is, when the ATA tells a story about the problems that big trucking companies face, but doesn't talk about the successes of the small trucking companies or the companies that don't have the churn problem. You go to Old Dominion or Saia and say, hey, do you have a driver shortage? They don't have the turnover that the big full truckload companies do.
The LTL guys certainly have the advantage. They run tighter networks. They tend to pay more because they're not as commoditized. There's a lot of advantages in having an LTL network. The average age of drivers tends to be a little older, a little more established, a lot more tenure in these LTL jobs. But Matt, I think it comes down to when you go against your own workforce and you create this division. And like Chris Spear made some comments about, he wrote an op-ed, or it was an op-ed no byline, by the way, but definitely had to go through his approval. And even on Facebook was attacking me for saying there's no truck driver shortage. Picking a fight just seemed foolish, because ultimately, all I care about and all we care about in this industry is having the conversations to move the industry forward. And we care deeply about the economics of this industry. Nobody should be confused about where I stand on how we want this market to operate: safe, secure, and people making money. That is clearly the issue. He got caught up in these pissing contests that seemed to be more important to him than achieving the mission of driving the economics of the industry. And ultimately, I think some of the member dues, they probably pulled their dues and sponsorship because they're like, look, you're hurting our industry when you're making these changes to these barriers to entry, and you're convincing Congress that there's a driver shortage, and it's just making our life more difficult. Fix it.
Absolutely. I mean, I look back at when we started seeing the autonomous vehicles start coming, like maybe 5-10 years ago, and they would all hang their hat on the story of the driver shortage, and the ATA says there's a driver shortage. When they tried to push out the apprenticeship program to let people under the age of 21 operate a commercial vehicle interstate, so crossing state lines, and they said, this is terrible. You can't go from Chicago to Kenosha, which is like 50 miles, but you can go from Chicago to Carbondale, which is a couple hundred miles. And the reality is, you can drive a truck in every state at the age of 19, almost every state. You can drive at 19 intrastate, within the state. And so these stories you've outlined, like that we have this chronic shortage, all these things have to be reduced, we have to do this and this and this. It ultimately comes back to the story of, what is the supply chain that you want? If you look at our supply chain right now and say, this is perfect, 22% national out-of-service rate for commercial vehicles, insurance minimums that have been set in 1985. This industry has a lot to overcome. And when you tell the story to Congress, who barely has time to learn about what the bill's name is, let alone what the bill's intended purpose is, you get these absurd outcomes. So my hope, and I hope for this for the ATA and every association that wants to learn about this, is that if you want to actually make this industry better, you have to tell the truth about it. And if you don't want to tell the truth about this industry, then you probably shouldn't be in this industry, because there's a lot of things to be proud of, a lot of things to be excited about. I mean, for high school educated men, driving a truck is the most common job across every single state. I
think the credibility of the ATA is going to depend on who is the leader, and can they bridge the gap to really say, hey, we recognize that we have too many truck drivers that don't belong, which there was a shift. In fairness to the ATA, at their October convention, the management convention, they did shift the conversation. Bob Costello made the argument that we had solved the truck driver shortage. It always had been solved because it never existed. But that's beside the point. But I think at least they're talking about we need qualified truck drivers, and not everyone everyone in this industry. So it is, I think we're getting some positivity out of that. We're going to be right back. I want to talk about another major issue, Matt, when we come back. This fight between two trucking technology behemoths right after these messages.
If you own or lease trailers, you may have a coverage gap you don't even realize exists. Centerline offers customized trailer insurance solutions for freight brokers and transportation companies, including liability and physical damage protection, with limits up to $1 million. With flexible pricing, customizable coverage options, and a dedicated claims team, Centerline delivers protection built specifically for the transportation industry. Visit centerlinepc.com to learn more.
The world doesn't wait, so neither do they. Wheels on the interstate, boots on the site, hands on the shipment. We build for the world out here, and we build it with the people who live it. Ideas from the field, made real by world-class R&D to keep the operation sharp, the front lines safe, and the world moving. From one cab to a global network, billions of miles, trillions of data points, every one making your operation better. And we never build it alone. Samsara, built with operators.
Once a year, the entire freight industry stops what it's doing and comes to one place, Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is F3, the Future of Freight Festival. It isn't just a conference, it's the largest festival in freight, built to pull you all the way in. The energy, the ideas, the atmosphere, and the people who move this industry forward. Over 50 speakers, 4 events across 3 days, founders, executives, innovators, and disruptors, all under one roof, all asking the same question: what comes next? On the main stage, the sharpest minds in freight take on the biggest questions in the business, the trends, the technology, and the forces shaping what's ahead. Then the clock starts, 7 minutes, no exceptions. The cutting edge of freight tech goes head to head, live, battling for best in show. When the time's up, the lights go out. And in between, the conversations that don't happen anywhere else. The connections that change the trajectory of your business. The relationships you'll carry long after you leave. Because when the sessions end, the festival begins. Live entertainment, unforgettable experiences, a celebration of the world of freight, and an energy you won't find at any other event in the industry. The leaders you need, the access you won't get anywhere else. This is where knowledge is shared, where deals get done, where the future of freight gets decided. F3, Future of Freight Festival, October 27th and 28th. The Signal, Chattanooga, Tennessee. We'll see you there. Register now at live.freightwaves.com.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Today. Freight Tech Awards are coming up, and we will present them at the F3 event. So be sure to nominate your favorite technology companies, because this is really the award where we get to recognize the companies that are doing innovative things around freight and technology. Something that I think everyone could applaud is we need more solutions to these big problems. But let's talk about something that is not a solution, but a problem and a headache for a lot of small fleets here. I want to disclose that I have some stock in both companies, Highway and Motive. Motive was a very early advisor to Motive, and was also a very early advisor to Highway. Highway started later, Motive's filed to go IPO. As a shareholder with the pre-IPO shares, I would like that. But let's talk about the story of this, Matt, because it's an interesting story. 2 major providers, Motive is a top, at least 3, some have said 2, of ELDs in the trucking business, fighting Highway. They have wanted to get paid for the data that comes out of their ELD devices, or the ELD devices that the fleets have and are paying for. Highway has had that access to that data feed for free since 2022, and Motive now wants to charge for it. Highway says, go pound sand. The customers are caught in between. Now, in fairness, they haven't cut them off. They have throttled them. And Highway is like, we're not paying for this. So thoughts here?
This is interesting. So first of all, I love both companies. Motive is phenomenal, what they do with ELDs. Highway is phenomenal at doing the validation of ELDs, helping make sure you can combat fraud and cargo theft and make sure you have the right carrier identity. I still keep trucking to me. I love Motive, but still keep trucking. I still think of it
right.
That way.
I like the name better. I mean, I get, it was a conversation years ago, actually, before they renamed themselves to Motive. I was in San Francisco and they were asking my opinion on the name. And I was like, honestly, I like Keep Trucking. It's cool. But I think for them, when Samsara started to gain a lot of momentum, a sponsor of our show, at least FreightWaves Today, when they gained a lot of momentum, did their IPO, and they started to really knock it out, at least in the public markets, as well as just really impressive financial growth. I think Motive, as sort of the number 2 player going after that same mission that Samsara had really became the market leader in the category king on. There's a lot of history in here, by the way. A great lawsuit that we've covered. The fact that was happening, I think Motive felt that they wanted to be more than just small fleets. I thought the name was cool, personally. They changed the name. Go ahead.
I asked someone from Motive what was the motive to make the change to Motive, and they didn't have a good answer. But I do agree with you. I think as we look at this question, so here's the fundamentals. ELDs are required by law with the ELD mandate. That spun up a whole gaggle of companies over the last decade or so. And Motive, Keep Trucking, that was one of the early big players focusing on small motor carriers. You had Platform Science and Samsara going some bigger fleets, but they became a very big player. And they charge money for the ELD to the motor carrier. And companies like Highway then spring up, and there's other tracking tools that consume information from the ELD. And that's what happens with the folks at Highway. They consume information from Motive, not paying a fee, but they connect into the API. And it becomes a question of whose data is it? Who owns it? So API infrastructure is not free. Making APIs and keeping them maintained costs money. There's no doubt about that. And the ELD itself is paid for by the motor carrier. And that data, as the motor carriers perceive it, is their data. It's theirs. If they tell you, I want this going to that place, then that's what the ELD provider is likely to do. If the fleet tells them, I want my data going to this partner. So this is the real question, is who should have to pay for the connection between Motive and Highway? Is Highway going to spend money to allow the customers of Motive to give their data over when for those customers of Motive, you don't have that full Highway integration, like you might not get as many loads, might be problems there. So I'm going to say that F3 should have a seminar or a panel where you moderate between the two companies because you clearly bridge the gap. But as I look at it, I think Motive is wrong. I think they're going to lose this. I mean, obviously not suing anybody yet. The story's still ongoing. But unless someone can show me how much money Motive is spending on maintaining the API infrastructure to Highway, it just looks like they're trying to grow their revenue base. And I'll never fault a company for wanting to grow their revenue because our shareholders all demand that we grow our revenue. But if the data belongs to the motor carrier and the motor carrier is already paying for that data and they're paying for the ELD, I don't see why they should have to pay more for Highway to utilize that information.
We have seen this conversation play out in another data element. I mean, DAT has made the argument that they have control over the data that comes across, that you cannot share your data with competitors of DAT for brokers. I wrote an op-ed about it that was in their terms and conditions, that if you are basically that you don't have the right. And that gets into the question of, is it your data or is it the third party? This is a question that's been played out, not just in our industry, but others. Now, Motive is arguing, at least in their actions, not necessarily their words, because they have been very quiet on this issue. As far as I know, they have not commented about it publicly, but at least in their actions, they are arguing that they have the right to basically monetize that data to the third-party vendors. And here's the problem. We buy a lot of data. We do. But we are not a workflow company. No one is getting denied access to load opportunities. I'm talking Sonar specifically. No one's getting denied access to load opportunities. And you could argue that you don't have to have Sonar to run your business. I wish they did. I wish I could make that argument that you must have Sonar to run your business, but that's a false argument. I can make your business more profitable. But you don't have to have Sonar to run your business. You have to have an ELD device. And arguably, if you're taking brokerage freight, you got it. You know, the brokers are using Highway to manage it. You got to have access to the network. We've talked about this before, that if Highway basically says that you're not an authorized carrier, which, you know, the identity flags that go up and says we can't verify identity. And there's been situations where carriers have complained about this, where they change their email address or change the IP address or change even address, physical address. It gets flagged as a no hire or a not authenticated authorization or unknown party, if you will. I don't know what the codes are inside the Highway system. I've never used it, but whatever that code is that basically flags it as a probably not best to hire, it means that carrier doesn't get those load opportunities. And I think the problem with that is that these fleets that have Motive are now effectively going to be blackballed in some cases, where brokers are just not going to override the Highway system and they're going to move on to the next truck, or it's going to be harder to tender loads. Now, in fairness, in tight markets, because this has been pointed out on X, in a tight market where you're struggling to find a truck if you're a broker, brokers will make exceptions. They always have. They will override the system and say, look, I've got to move the load. It's a Motive carrier. But here's the problem. In many parts of the United States, even in tight markets, you are competing against other carriers. And no broker is going to go out of their way to override the system in a market where it's a loose capacity situation. We're talking backhaul markets. Just take the state of Florida. There's a backhaul market in Montana that loads out there, but there's plenty of times that there are backhaul markets across the United States, even in tight freight markets. And the broker is just not going to work that hard to take a motive carrier over a carrier that Highway picks up. And here's the other issue, Matt, is Highway, at least according to what they have told me, is they have an estimated 75 to 80% of brokerage loads, not necessarily install base, but loads volumes, Highway's installed inside the brokerage industry. So here's the problem. If you're a motive carrier, which tends to be small and mid-sized fleets, that rely upon brokerage freight far more than the big carriers do that perhaps have a platform science installation, you are going to be declined for those opportunities or invisible to brokers because they're not going to use you. And the issue, Matt, one more point, is that in an environment where there's hypersensitivity to security, but also compliance, because of the lupus and the Montgomery issues, this strikes as foolish on my where I'm at from motives. It strikes as very counter and somewhat tone deaf.
What I would say, I think you're exactly right. In a post-Montgomery world, and you are a freight broker, and you're being asked to override whatever protocols you have because you don't have a good integration with Motive because they've throttled it or whatever, you're not going to see people taking on that risk. And when it comes to renewal season for those ELDs, this is a self-inflicted, this is an unforced error on the part of Motive, because the reality is you would like to be as friendly with the people that do the vetting and compliance as you can. So I go back to the initial point of there is no doubt there is a cost to maintain and build out API infrastructure to connect to other systems. No doubt about that. But if Motive has the opinion that they're going to stop giving the data to Highway and force Highway to capitulate, one thing would happen is every other ELD provider would then do that to Highway, and I think they probably wouldn't like that. But secondarily, if you become the one ELD that is like the persona non grata, you're coming in and we can't really verify things, you're just not going to get freight. And if you don't get freight, your business is toast. So it's a penny smart, but a dollar foolish, in my opinion. And so my feeling is they're going to work it out. I can't imagine they want this to be in the press for a very long time. There are small motor carriers who are not super big fans of Highway. I know this, but I also know that there's people who are not a fan of all sorts of technologies. So
well, there's also fans. I mean, you're right. I mean, small carriers tend to loathe Highway. If we're going to be, you said, look, it's not a popular company among small carriers. They view it as restrictive. And this is something that Highway's had to work through as they've rolled out TFX. I think that's a fair point. You can go on to social media and you can read all of the comments. And look, that ultimately has hurt potentially the liquidity of the TFX, the Trusted Freight Exchange that they've rolled out. Sort of a load board-like technology or matching technology. Certainly fleets are like pound sand Highway. We don't like you because you make my life difficult. Same ways that when I use my credit card and I get declined, I get frustrated because it won't let me buy something because it thinks I'm traveling or it identifies a pattern that's questionable in my personal spending behavior that says, hey, we don't think this is who he says he is. It frustrates me, especially when you don't have an 800 phone number I can call when I'm overseas. Chase, I'm talking to you. You need to fix that. And so, but Matt, I think the more important thing is that, and this is my read on it, is Motive wants to go public. Please do. We like that. I'd like that as a shareholder. But if you're a public investor invested in an ELD company or going to invest in an ELD company, you care about net new, these are fleets that you add to it, installs, retention, and churn. The money that they will make on Highway will be so insignificant, so irrelevant to their shareholders in the big scheme of things, that it won't matter And the churn that they're giving up, the churn that they are allowing and basically contributing to, as you said, a self-induced wound, is going to end up hurting them more in public markets than it ends up helping them.
100%. And this is the part I think I would just, if anyone from Motive is listening, I mean, keep trucking, obviously, but here's what I would say to you. You are not going to get the largest brokers in the country to go away from Highway. Highway's entire business model, when they first came to market, reminded me a lot of Platform Science. Platform Science went after the largest motor carriers in the country, and then they got into the OEMs because they had the largest fleets in the country. When you're a broker and you see the brokered freight is growing as a percentage of overall tonnage every single year, because it tends to grow every single year, and Highway is inextricably linked to so many processes within the brokerage community now, that is not going to change. Motive saying, I'm not going to give you access, is not going to change the business model or the go-to-market strategy of Highway. And what will end up happening, I think you're right, is that there will be churn for smaller motor carriers as they look at new ELDs. And there's 1,000 of them to choose from. They're self-certified, so I don't know. There's plenty of options.
I mean, it does, well, 1,000, come on, Matt. There's like 50 of them that actually have a legitimate qualified. You're talking about the 950. I mean, that are actually, you can backdoor them, lots of fraud. But it does.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
absolutely.
The reality here is it just feels naive. And it may be, you know, look, I'm trying to always sort of understand what is the motives here. Where did this piece of data come into the Motive management team to say, hey, we have leverage here? Maybe it is the hatred of Highway for small carriers. Maybe when they were asking small carriers about the frustration, those small carriers, which do tend to hate Highway, you can go onto social media and read this, maybe that feedback really changed the perspective of the boardrooms and the management team to say, look, we can get away with it. We can do this because small fleets hate Highway. But what is misunderstood in this, which is why I look at this and I'm like, I don't get it, is that it's not the small fleet that is actually dealing with Highway or paying the bill or the customer of Highway. The small fleet is a taker of opportunities from Highway's customer network. From the customers that pay Highway, the brokers, those small fleets depend on it. And I follow the money. Every single story that we cover comes down to what are the incentives and where's the money? And in the money relationship in the freight market with small fleets is the brokers. And if a broker says, I'm not going to do business because I need to be compliant, I need to be secure because the risks are too high, and we know that they're high, and they continue to get higher, then you have a problem. And let me make one more point. We did a couple stories inside of FreightWaves. We've covered them on FreightWaves today about lawsuits that are currently in the court system where companies tendered a load to a carrier, so they thought, and those loads were then double brokered. Those loads were double brokered and in some cases triple brokered. And here's the problem. It was an accident. The primary broker that had originated the broker was unaware that the loads had been double or triple brokered. But because the plaintiff's attorneys have done the work that they are inspired to do, and I use that I don't like plaintiff's attorneys, even the ones that listen to the show, which they do. The fact is that they were basically tracked the breadcrumb back, and we've talked about shippers being exposed to this. So the problem that you end up getting is in a very hypersensitive environment where theft and cargo security are real. Double brokering is a major concern, and now we know about plaintiffs' attorneys that are trying to exploit double brokering operations when the original broker had no knowledge that the load was being double brokered. This stuff is going to get litigated, and there's a chance, we don't know, there's a chance that the jury decides that the primary broker is responsible in some fashion. It only has to be 1% responsible, Matt. We've covered this, where even if it's a tiny, 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 tiny percent, in the court system, in certain states, you could pay the whole bill.
It's an interesting question, as you kind of correctly outlined here, is that the liability brokers face is so much more substantial today than it was 3 or 4 years ago. And it only seems to get more and more terrifying as we look forward. My feeling is Motive is sitting in their offices and they're watching year over year how much data they're supplying to Highway. And they're watching as their customers, their motor carriers, are increasingly entangled with what happens at Highway. And there's a real chance, and I don't think this would happen, but you can imagine this. Highway could probably destroy Motive entirely by just saying, no one with Motive can go through our system. We're not going to let anyone go through. Now, they're not going to do that. That's like the nuclear option. But this is a fight that I don't think Motive can win. And even if small motor carriers are reluctant or don't like Highway or they don't like brokers, I'm sorry, buddy, that's how you make your living. And if you don't like making your living working with brokers, go call on shippers directly and see if they want to work with you. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But this challenge that Motive has put in front of itself, again, is an unforced error. And when they go back to their boardroom and they say, can we walk this back? I'm fully expecting in a week from now, Craig, we're going to see, it was a misunderstanding. Oh, we never meant, it was a misunderstanding.
Well, I talked to, Julie and I were talking earlier on FreightWaves Today about the fact that, she's like, oh my gosh, how do they walk it back? And you and I talked about this, it's just like a lawsuit settlement. You basically put out an announcement, or you just go about your way. Highway says we've now resumed, or Motive says something, probably Highway, because they're the one who put the original statement out, and it's their, it's fleets that are impacted through the Highway network. Somebody puts out a statement, and you never really know what happened. Could it be a settlement? Yes. Could it be financial settlement? Yes. Could Highway start paying because the pain is significant enough where they blink? Yeah, that's a possibility. You have to evaluate that. Can Motive blink because they're starting to see churn? Absolutely. I don't think this goes on very long, Matt, to your point. I think at some point it becomes painful for both companies. I mean, Highway is probably hearing from some of its brokerage clients, and certainly from some of the fleets that are very angry and are blaming Highway, but it does strike that this is a red and blue situation where people sort of look through the lens of the company that they least like most and blame that party.
I'll make an open invitation. If Highway and Motive would like Craig and me to help mediate this problem, I'm happy to help. I'm sure, Craig, you'd be more than
we should have binding mediation. We'll do it in front of the audience. We should do this. We'll get a legally binded mediator. I don't know, Matt. Are you a mediator? Are you allowed to mediate?
Anyone can be. You can get certified. But here's what I think you're right.
But can you do it, or should we bring in a real mediator and we'll do?
You need a real mediator. We can help advise.
Let's do this. About the business. Let's invite the Motive team and the Highway team, and look, if they will agree to binding mediation.
Oh man, this might be the beginning of Freight Court. www.freightcourt.com. We could have it, Craig. Idea. It's there.
I think we should do it. We could do it in Chicago or Dallas.
That's great. Everyone loves Chicago, the city of broad shoulders. Let's do it when you get the new facility.
We got the new facility. I'm really excited about that, Matt. It is going to be in January. We've got this beautiful facility on Michigan Avenue that we are opening up. FreightWaves is going to open up its first studio outside of Chattanooga. And what's cool about it is it's on Michigan Avenue. It's right across from the park. It's right across from the planetarium, which I'm a nerd and I love that.
I love the planetarium.
And it's right, you know what I'm talking about because it's right there. You know the city better than I do, and I know our audience probably knows Chicago better than I do. But anyways, it's right there on Michigan Avenue, South Michigan Avenue. And we're going to have, not only are we doing a morning show that will start up in January, which we're right now working on. We're looking for talent if you want to be on the show. As well as this facility will host up to 120 people. It is right now a concert venue for piano recitals. It's a piano store. On the second floor, they've got these this recital facility, concert facility. Absolutely epic build out in terms of production quality and sound is what my team tells me, because again, it's playing piano up there. You got piano perfectionists up there, and we're going to put Freight up there.
The audience is already clamoring. I've heard it myself. I go downtown, like, this is coming. It's going to happen. I think that this, to tie this all together, what we have watched in our industry over the last few decades is erosion of the barriers to enter for brokers as well as motor carriers, and it's made the industry far less resilient than we'd like it to be. There's always things happening, but Freight never stops. And with Motive and with the folks at Highway, they will find a resolution. I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding. They're both going to pay their own costs for the API. They're all going to have a great time and look at that partnership accelerate over the years to come, because I suspect both Highway and Motive both want to be public companies someday. They both have aspirations to do more. And I think that when you look at what happened with Chris Spear, it's the same idea. You've told a story that wasn't accurate for a long time, and you need new blood. You need to change things up. And everything about our industry is showing me increasingly that we need radical transformation. And one very simple thing that everybody can do is to call your legislature and say, hey, I want you to pass CORCA because I want to combat organized retail crime. And the only way you can combat organized retail crime is with Combating Organized Retail Crime Act within CORCA. Fun to say, more fun to explain, and God willing, it gets passed sooner than later.
Well, Matt, there's so much going on. I got to get your take. Last point, or last thing we want to talk about is the freight market in the industrial side is benefiting significantly, and I mean massively, from the largest infrastructure build out in world history, and that is the AI data centers. It's bigger than the interstate highway system in terms of the capital that's going into it, over $700 billion, not in GPUs, by the way, but actual construction. I'm talking concrete, steel, aluminum, copper, generators, transformers, America, good stuff, heavy stuff. All of that is happening right now on the ground. It's providing an enormous amount of lift to our economy. The economy, at least the goods economy and the construction economy, not talking housing, talking heavy industrial construction, is benefiting significantly from the AI data centers. NVIDIA sales, I think their forecast is something, they've significantly increased their forecast because everyone's like, is this a bubble? Is it going to run out? There's no signs of that. In fact, according to NVIDIA, which is basically fueling this with their technology and probably the primary beneficiary, we continue to see growth, and we're continuing to see, corporate earnings are up something like 50% year over year. It is definitely having an impact on the economy, but the unions have come out and said, we are pro-data center, and any politician that isn't is not going to get our support, which is a really interesting development because data centers are generally unpopular, but the people in the unions that are helping build these, the electricians, the steel workers, the transportation workers, the railroad workers, are seeing greatness out of it. And yet it's become a political punching bag. Thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I'll just full disclosure, I serve on the board of a phenomenal company called Velocity, and we actually do data center cabling. So not the power lines necessarily, but the cabling, the coordinated cabling throughout the systems. And the reality is this requires a lot of enormous skilled labor. Electricians, plumbers, there's so much that goes into making one of these things. But to your point, what we see increasingly is this idea of the NIMBYs, not in my backyard. I love them, I don't want them in my backyard. And that's become this ongoing challenge for data centers. I think the data centers that are off the main grid that can supply their own power or that have the ability to go off not using any of the city or municipal water has an easier path to getting approved. But this is going to be something that's going to go on for many, many years. This is perhaps the biggest growth in industrial construction we've seen in a very, very long time. And it doesn't seem to be slowing down. And it's not just America. This is stuff that's happening globally because it used to be the case that you can't manage something you don't measure. And now you can measure everything. Just with the clip we had about Sonar a few minutes ago, 1 trillion points of data. This is not an exception. This is what's happening all over. There's so many more things capturing information, and you can't stop this path. It is going to continue to happen. And if one state doesn't want them, another state will happily welcome them in.
Well, and look, some of the proposals that you've heard, I mean, Vic out of Ohio has said, look, if you're going to build a data center in a zip code, give them free power. We've seen other proposals talk about the fact that just like the Alaska Permanent Fund that really pays for oil extraction in Alaska, gives people a check every single month. So a form of UBI, paying you.
That's right.
Look, honestly, if you want to get people to support data centers, start paying people. And the amount of money that these data centers generate for their owners is significant, which is also an issue in and of itself because the numbers are staggering. It enables them to do things. There's been stories in the state of Washington of they built a $120 million school and just infrastructure in that state through funding of the taxes off data centers. It strikes me that the problem isn't just NIMBYism, The problem is the data center construction and the AI hyperscalers have done a poor job of getting the public to benefit from this construction directly. I think if you eliminated property taxes, or at least slow down property taxes like we've seen in the state of Florida, or you give away free electricity, or you end up building infrastructure, give teachers increased salaries, fund the police departments, the roads to my house that are potholes, cities, to that stuff would, if it benefits people, they will start to appreciate it. And let's be honest, these data centers, they put noise, they do drain power generation that require lots of power. They do take some water. They compete, but they have closed loop systems or open loop systems where the water goes out, it's not gone, it's just used for cooling and recycled. But these are resource issues, and they are in some ways noisy. That's no different than building a factory. It's no different than building other things. In fact, it's arguably better.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. Like, you look at the trucking industry. I mean, I've been in this industry now for 16 years, and I was in the maintenance space. And I can tell you right now, like, nobody wants big trucks around them. Nobody wants them. That's partially why Yellow was so valuable, because they had these terminals in places you just can't build anymore. But we need these things. We need this type of innovation and this growth. And if you don't want it in your backyard, it'll be in someone else's backyard, because it is necessary. And so I think the data center companies have to do a better job of explaining to citizens why this is so good for them, or the benefits that they have. There has to be accountability. So if you say, I'm not using any municipal water, I'm going to be completely closed, that's something you got to be held accountable to.
Matt,
and I think
it strikes me a lot like the nuclear argument. Nuclear, I think, is a bit more scary in many ways, which it creates its own thing. But a lot of what happened with the nuclear industry was this noise, this lack of information, this, call it ignorance, and these sort of activists that were fighting nuclearization, which then we got, much dirtier fuels with carbon who kill far more people than any nuclear. Not a single American citizen has died from a nuclear energy powered problem in terms of these nuclear plants, even really. And so it's interesting, except, 3 Mile, I think 3 people died from the fires there. But actually, the nuclear radiation was not a factor in any of that in the United States, despite the fact that it is there. It feels very similar to those types of arguments: anti-nuclear, anti-carbon. Now it's anti-data center. It's just like, come on, man! You guys just hate progress.
Yeah, this is an interesting fact that I learned a while back, but a decent amount of the anti-nuclear power plant stories and information and news was funded by the oil and gas industry, because they didn't want to have that competition. There is no safer way to generate power than nuclear energy. And dry cask storage, like the way you store the spent rods and everything, it's safe. It's not like it's some horrifying disaster. And so what ends up happening with nuclear power plants is there's no pathway to make the same kind of thing every single place. It's a new design every time you do it, and there's so many people that fight you on building them. But that is the future of renewable energy. Is nuclear is phenomenal.
And Matt, one more point on that. It went from the oil and gas industry to actually countries are funding this stuff. Russia and China.
That's right.
Russia specifically did not want Europe. I mean, it's really destroyed a lot of the European industrial base, particularly Germany. Because if you even go between France and Germany, France never stopped building nuclear plants and has one of the largest per capita installations of nuclear in the entire world. Germany did the opposite. It decommissioned it. Now it's relied upon coal.
Isn't that a great solution? That's a great solution. That was funded.
And we've seen an article that just came out yesterday where something like 200X got rid of over 200,000 bots that were really funded by Chinese and Russian overseas bot farms to get to people upset about data centers. And so this is now a geopolitical thing where the Chinese government does not want America to have the technological edge of solving things like what we saw with the Moderna vaccination that is going to help, potentially cure cancer through AI. The other advancements in society, this fear that tends to overwhelm us. It's all about NIMBYism. That's it for this week. We'll be back next week for Freight Expectations. Have a great weekend.